Sociologist and Executive Leadership Advisor, Dr. Mwale Henry, joins me on the Zoom line, and it's always a joy to engage in conversation with you, Dr. Henry. I look forward to today's discourse. A very interesting one as we treat with clearly political tensions, political fallout. And I've read an article, very important one that you would have penned recently, speaking about politics and more or less putting into terms we could all understand the dynamics, the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts of politics, and more so describing what a political party is. I'd love for you to elaborate with the audience this morning as we get into our discussion. As always, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Jason, and good morning to your viewers.
So first question.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, loud and clear, loud and clear. You would have mentioned, you would have asked the age-old question, what is a political party? Dr. Henry, what is a political party?
So a political party, if you talk about politics, politics is the ability to demonstrate competency, to wield power, and display good judgment. And a party is the assembling of people who are mobilized to support that type of decision and competency. So that's the whole purpose of a political party. It's designed to really bring forth that type of competence and that sense of confidence in your vision, in the party's policy and its programs.
And obviously that policy will be put forward via, I'm sure, some kind of constitution. They will have internal code of conduct, as it were, and anyone who steps out of that particular instruction, that particular form, is not to any line anymore. They actually will bring disrepute and, I would imagine, tension to the political party. What happens in that regard? Anybody who steps out of that normed and established code of behavior?
Well, you identified two things. Every organization operates based on their written constitution, which guides political behavior, and also its conventions, which are its unwritten rules set by presidents, practice, historical outcomes. So those are the two things that would guide decision-making for any political organization. And to your question, yes, once you fall outside that ambit, the organization would have its mechanism to treat and deal with anything that's an outlier to its principles and its programs.
So I would imagine anyone who goes against the tide, and I'm going to be very specific now as we deal with the Brand Manning situation, must know two things. Is either, well, you obviously know it's going to cause disruption and it's going to shake the cage of the said political party. So I would imagine it would stem from a place of probably frustration, not being heard within the context and within the walls of the political party, or it can be done to, I don't know, herald some kind of shake-up. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why someone, knowing fully well it will create such a storm, would take such action, especially in a party that would deal with their issues internally. That's more or less been the PNM mandate and their ethos for years, but clearly we're seeing a different style in this 2026 and a different approach and a different outburst, as it will.
Well, if we examine the approach, I don't pretend to know the internal workings of the People's National Movement or any political party. So what the general public will have to depend on is what's publicly said by its members and by its officials. So if we are to take your specific example of Brand Manning, we can categorize it in three ways. One, what was said, what was not said, and what is left unclear. And if you examine just the press conference that was given by the leadership of the People's National Movement, if your viewers would remember, it was stated as an emergency press conference. And my question is, why is the statements of the MP of San Fernando East constitutes or rise to the level of an emergency when you have the central bank is seeking answers from First Citizens Bank and is concerned of its management systems? You have the IMS is predicting a 0.8% growth rate. You have over 465 PDOs that are in train, and over 449 of them were issued or executed. So there's a gap of persons who have not been issued MPDOs. So you have a myriad of issues, pertinent issues that govern the landscape. But this political party decided that the statements of the honorable member rose to the point of an emergency. So from that perspective alone, it causes you to lean into ask why. Why was this an emergency and what constitutes it?
Yeah, understood. And, as we look towards, again, we're just doing that full examination of the landscape and politics in this current 2026. You would have made an interesting point here. You said you are judged by results, not by the reasons you cannot produce them. But we have seen the blame game politics for generations. Folks going in and saying, well, they're behind the wheel, but the coffers are empty. They have met the Treasury, at its last. We can't do this because the last administration, XYZ, and we have seen both two major parties play that game forever. Isn't that now normalized? Isn't that like part of the fabric of the local politics, that blame game?
Well, it's normalized by politicians, but by its constituents and by the voters. They are sending a signal, and I really hope that the politicians are listening. Voter participation has consistently decreased. So voters have really sent its assessment of politicians, and I'm not sure if there is a certain attention to that fact. You've alluded to there are issues currently in this administration under the Honorable Prime Minister Kamala Harris that she has to attend to. We have over close to 70 resignations or firings or shifts of persons who operate on state boards or senior management directorship positions. And there's no clear answer. Just yesterday, I think someone from the self-help board was removed. And in the absence of all of this, Jason, we have in the person of Ms. Becca Robinson, who is both the opposition leader and political leader. And according to Section 83 of the Constitution, she holds the trust of those who do not support the government. And that includes not just PMMites, but persons who just chose not to vote, people who are dejected. And in the absence of these types of explanations and concerns, legitimate concerns, the opposition leader has not placed many of these issues, or should I say, prosecuted successfully these issues that force the government to bring forth clarity or questions. The political capital of all these resignations has not translated to the vigilance of the opposition.
And as you mentioned, the opposition leader, and clearly you're speaking of the national issues, and obviously for, I guess, her role and function to lend a bigger voice. One is to, well, it begs to ask the question as it pertains to the internal rumblings. From your observation, through your lens, how is she navigating these choppy waters within her own party where other members of the party are speaking out, let's say, against what would have happened there with MP Manning? Just your take on the opposition leader's performance and navigation of this particular moment internally within the walls of the PNM.
Well, my assessment, I come from the private sector and the results matter. I alluded to you, Section 83 gives the opposition leader a clear mandate and the responsibilities to investigate, to cause vigilance, and to place appropriate pressure on the state is her sole responsibility. And whatever internal rumblings that is happening within the PNM does not negate nor escape her sole responsibility. From the last time I checked, the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago does not have the word People's National Movement in it. It speaks to the role of the opposition leader, and that's her sole right and discretion to exercise that authority and to be successful and competent in that position. So from that perspective, it's her performance. I probably will lean into what her predecessor said. He said, when asked the question of her performance, her predecessor indicated that she's trying. And clearly, if you assess the period where Dr. Rowley was the opposition leader, statistically, every year you saw three key elements that turned the tide for the People's National Movements of resignations, of withdrawals, because of a direct pressure of the opposition leader. That has not happened. Presently, we are 15, 16 months in, and the scoreboard is still zero in terms of the performance of the opposition. And to your key question, internal rumblings cannot impact the performance of one, a political leader, or two, an opposition leader, because this is about leadership. And I'm a church boy, and I remember in Sunday school, the Bible tells you that he that is faithful in little will be faithful in much. This is the opposition's leader and political leader opportunity to be faithful in little. It's the People's National Movement, because if you have to rise to elevation of the prime minister, you're going to have to deal with your party. You'll have to deal with the opposition. You'll have to deal with the entire country. You'll have to deal with global issues. So you have to be able to pass muster and rise to the occasion of perform. That responsibility squarely sits at her feet and no one else.
Interesting. How does one maneuver their own party when they've, basically gone against the tide? They have not toed the line, and more or less they are seen as literally an outsider. That's the vibe I'm getting, obviously. I don't know the internal rumblings, what would have caused Brian Manning to step forward. But we have seen, not only in this case, but even with the current administration, UNC, when certain key players would have gone against the leadership, more or less they were given, the writing was almost on the wall, and we knew that it was a matter of time before they would have been ushered out of the space. What you anticipate will be the ultimate conclusion, the final curtain call for anyone? What's been your observation for people who step out and they don't toe the line and they step out of the established structure of the party and speak out of turn through the political experience?
Well, first of all, I would want to stay away from the personality examination and more of an institutional examining. The most recent press conference that was held by the People's National Movement, and you examine the content of that press conference, it leads to that question of party discipline across the board. Let me show you this. So there were executive members of the People's National Movement was led by, and I'm only examining the prepared statements, and a prepared statement before if you examine the chairman's comments, Mr. Gonzalez, he did not display neutrality, and he was selective in his application. The deputy political leader of policy, he gave a very procedural detail, but he was materially asymmetrical in how he examined the participation of Patricia Alexis. And then you have Columbine Burt, who is seen as the most senior member with parliamentary experience. He gave an institutional understanding of, yes, there's rumblings in both UNC and the PNM. It's not new, but they were able to win an election, and he is correct. But he selectively chose the indiscipline. And that takes me to the most egregious for me when I analyzed. I looked, if you allow me, Jason, I looked at the content. And one of the most disappointing examination on the lack of party discipline was found in Dr. Amy Brown. He was clearly adversarial, he was least neutral, and he was most problematic. He said things like, some may call the MP a rogue MP. He went on to say, and I'll read, he said, no, MP has the power to unselect an individual to serve in a constituency or executive. And for me, the worst breach that he would have used in terms of party discipline, he used this word. He compared the MP to a UNC member who is using unsubstantiated claims to tarnish people's name to get their way. So from that example to you, Jason, I am seeing a party who is not disciplined across the board, not its leaders, neither its members. If you have to apply from a public perspective, if you have to apply party discipline, it applies to Robert Lee Hunt, it applies to Mr. Manning, It applies to Patricia Alexis. It applies to the Women's League, who still issued a statement after this press conference. So indiscipline across the board, especially amongst its leaders, points to a lack of leadership.
Indeed. You mentioned here, as we look to wrap things up via your article, that political competence must come before party support. And I guess, in a nutshell, probably our politics across the board, and again, we're looking at what's happening on both sides of the divide, and even with the third parties putting themselves forward, every controversy, every drama, I hope that we get to a place ultimately of political maturity where we could come out of some of this, this kind of bacchanal that we see going on left and right. I mean, yes, that will always be part of the mix. But are we anywhere closer, as we wrap things up in the seconds that remain, to that political maturity that we speak of, that we aspire towards, that we wish for our country? Through your lens, are we anywhere closer?
At this point, we are not, because principles are being cherry-picked, and leaders across the board who are expected to apply judicial process, be it allegations, be it concerns, and I intently say across the board. You would remember the infamous live sport incident. The Honorable Prime Minister, for many who thought she prematurely placed the report in the public domain. So those questions remain unanswered. And now we see the chairman of the People's National Movement prematurely pronouncing that the party doesn't have the capacity to investigate criminal allegations. So I would say we are nowhere closer for three key reasons. One, there isn't a scientific application of what is happening in the electoral space. The People's National Movement, last election cycle, in marginal seats, they have lost ground up to almost 27%, whilst the UNC increased ground, which is around 15%. The People's National Movement saw a collapse in their party base, an erosion around 33%. So my advice, if anyone is listening across the political divide, we must be able to apply matters objectively and across the board. And I'll leave you with this analogy. In 2006, Chandler Paul, a really illustrious batsman, a middle order batsman, he admitted on ESPN that he was forced out into retirement. And when asked the question, he was reflecting on some of his statistical performance, and it visibly fell. And the conclusion amongst the commentators was, it's not enough to stay wicket. You must be able to score, or the opposition leader. It's not enough to stay in the wicket. You're required to score runs, because the society will eventually judge you harshly and force you to retire.
Dr. Henry, as always, sincere thanks. Great conversation this morning. Until the next one, all the best and happy independence in advance to you.
Thank you so much. All the best to you, Jason, and to your viewers.
That's right, Dr. Mwale Henry touching base with us as we examine the political landscape. Up next, another impactful, very impactful conversation, especially with the youth. We get ready for the Youth Forum, National Youth Forum, literally tomorrow. Yes, and we get some details from some of the personalities within the ministry just to get us in tune with the activity. Stay tuned.